So we've talked about some of the benefits that soil organic carbon brings to our farm. I'm going to touch on drought resistance. Now in Australia, drought is a massive problem that rises every few years. And so learning to, I guess, live with drought and learning how to manage our water so that we can become drought resistant, I think is a very important thing that Australian farmers need to do. And so this conversation is, I guess, combines the soil organic carbon, or the benefits of soil organic carbon, to building drought resistance. And so when we look at hydrological functioning in our soil, everything comes down to this. So we get rainfall or precipitation that comes into our soil, or the storage in our soil. Now that can only leave in two ways, or three, but two ways. Evapotranspiration, which is evaporation. So if you have a puddle on a hot day, that's going to evaporate, which is the evapo part. And transpiration is, think of it as plants sweating. Water evaporates from the surface of the leaves, and that's called transpiration. So evapotranspiration is both of them combined, but that's essentially water moving up. And then we're going to have runoff. So runoff can either exist in two forms. So it can be a horizontal runoff, so the water doesn't soak into the soil, it runs straight off. And then we also have what's called dune runoff, which is the water goes into our soil, but then it actually runs off through the water, through the soil itself. So if you ever see like a spring coming out of a hillside, that's dune runoff, and that's water coming out of basically the hill. And so that's mainly due to the soil not being able to hold the water. Now there's a final way that water moves around, and that's with deep infiltration, I think, or deep water storage. And basically the water goes into the groundwater, and so that would be moving down. But for this, we're just going to consider those three functions. Now, evapotranspiration and runoff we can view as waste. Maybe not transpiration, but definitely evaporation is wasted water, and runoff is wasted water. So the whole aim of building drought resistance is capturing more water, or pushing more water into our soil, holding it there for longer and not losing it. Cool. So the first thing we're going to talk about is water infiltration. Water infiltration is how fast can we move water into our soil. So it's the rate at which water moves into our soil. Now, think of these as pipes. And so you can either have a small pipe going into our soil, which is kind of like a slow flow, or our soils can have a large pipe that pushes water into our soil. And that's, you can think of that as fast. So if we have a small pipe, say it can infiltrate 10 mils an hour, and we get a big storm come through, and we're going to get 20 mils an hour of rainfall, effectively, we're limited by the infiltration of our soil. So we're only going to be able to capture 10 mils of water an hour, which means we're going to lose 10 mils of water an hour as runoff, which is waste. So we're wasting 10 mils of water. So you might as well only get 10 mils of water. And so when you get excited that you had a big shower and you got all this rain, did you really get all that rain, or are you only actually capturing a small amount? So if we had a really big pipe, for example, at 50 mils an hour, and we've got a massive rain event, we can capture all of that water. So all of that water can then go into our soil, and so we're not going to get any runoff and not waste any of it. So we want to capture as much water as possible and move as much water into our soil. So, and we want to have as little runoff as possible. So how are we going to do that? We want macro pores, which are like worm tunnels, old root paths. We want to increase the soil organic matter in our soil. So we want the structure on our left here, not our right. We also want to improve the tilt of our soil, which is kind of like the pliability of our soil, but we don't want it super crumbly. We want it nice and well structured together, but we don't want to break easily. We want to improve the structure of our soil, and we also want to reduce compaction. So see here on the left-hand side, there's most likely a compaction issue where the cursor is. And so if we get rainfall, these pore spaces are going to fill up, and then we're going to almost lose our ability to infiltrate lower. We want infiltration right down through our soil profile, not just in the top. So the next component we want to look at is the water holding capacity of our soil, which is also contributed by the soil organic matter component. So if you think of the water holding capacity as how much water can our soils hold? So think of it like a water tank. We can either have a small water holding capacity or a large water holding capacity. So if, again, we get a really large rain event, we get 200 mils, but we only have a really small water holding capacity, we might as well get a smaller storm because most of that's going to be wasted. So if we only have 100 mils of water holding capacity, we're going to lose 100 mils. So it doesn't really matter. Now, if we have a really large water holding capacity and we can capture all that, say, and assuming that we're not infiltration limited, we get to capture all of that water and we're not going to waste any of it. So we want as large of a bucket or water tank as possible to hold lots and lots of water. So how much can we hold? As I said before, soil organic matter holds about 4 times its weight in water. So we want to increase soil organic carbon or soil organic matter to do this. That's a summary of what I said before. Essentially, if we increase our soil organic matter, we can increase the water holding capacity or the amount of water we can hold, which is expressed in rainfall. And if we increase it to even 5 times the soil organic carbon amount, we can almost double our water holding capacity. So soil organic carbon is truly the main way we can increase the water holding capacity in our soil, and it's a massive benefit. So say we have a wheat crop and that's using about 4 mils of water a day. We can basically estimate how long our soil is going to last before we run out of water. And so in the small water holding situation, our soils are going to run out of water within 12.5 days. That's going to be problematic if we don't get rain in those 12.5 days. On the other hand, if we have a really big water holding capacity and we captured all that rain, our soil is going to be able to last 50 days before that runs out of water. Now, yeah, there's a couple of assumptions in that, and that's not really how it works in real life, but the idea still stands. The other component is we want to reduce water evaporation in our soils, and so humus has a really interesting function, and essentially what it does, it can stabilize soil temperature through its insulation properties. And so it's going to prevent water from being released into the atmosphere. Therefore, it's going to buffer hot weather, keeping the soil cooler. So this reduces water heating up and evaporating. Now, this is very important for Australia, where our ET, which is evaporation, very high. We have very high amounts of evaporation in our soil in Australia. And so it's very important that we increase our humus so we can conserve as much water as possible. So this equation is a simple equation to estimate the evaporation at any point. And essentially, this T here is almost a fixed variable. Actually, it's dependent on temperature. This is dew point. That's altitude. And so we have this T here and this T here. So when the temperature increases, effectively evaporation is going to increase too. So when it's hot, water evaporates more. Therefore, if we can keep our soils and water cool, we keep more of our water. Now, this kind of makes sense. If we have a hot day, puddles are going to dry up faster. It makes a fair amount of sense. So let's put all that together. How can we build drought resistance? And so essentially, it's a function of all of those things. We want to increase our water infiltration rates. We want to increase our water holding capacity, and we also want to reduce our water evaporation. Now, typically in Australia, we are water limited. Therefore, we can really easily increase production by storing more water in our soil. So how this works, we want to increase our infiltration, so rainfall. When we do get rainfall, we want to make sure we're capturing as much of that rainfall as possible. We want to make sure it goes into our soil. When we increase our water holding capacity, we're going to reduce the amount that's run off in June flow, but also we get to capture a lot more of it. And we're going to limit water. We're going to limit evaporation. So we're going to lose less water. Now, all that combined, and plus, I guess, other management strategies, which are beyond soil organic matter, that's going to allow us to build drought resistance. So let's, I guess, run through an example. So say we have a large infiltration, but a small water holding capacity. Now let's compare that to a small infiltration rate, but a large water holding capacity. So you can see there the numbers for each and we'll run through the example. So say we get a big storm, we're getting 20 mils an hour for 5 hours. So that's 100 mils. So in our first situation, the infiltration rate keeps up with rainfall. So that's a big tick. So in the first hour, we're going to capture all 20 mils. So it's going to be 40% full. Second hour, we're going to capture all the water as well. So it's going to be 40% full, 40 mils full. But in the third hour, we're full. And so really we can't capture any more water and it doesn't really matter. So after that, once the water holding capacity is full, with 150, with 50 mils, we're going to lose 50 mils to runoff. Now, if we apply the same logic that we did previously with calculating our basically what value that water's worth at, effectively, we're going to miss out on 50 mils a hectare or 0.5 megs, which means we're going to miss out on $50 a hectare. So the other example is that our infiltration doesn't keep up with rainfall. So we're going to get a lot more runoff. So in the first hour, we're going to get 10 mils captured and 10 mils runoff. Second hour, we're going to capture 20 mils total with 20 mils runoff. And essentially, we're going to do that all the way through to the fifth hour, where we're going to have 50 mils full and 50 mils of runoff. So our total runoff, again, is 50 mils, which is 0.5 megs. And so we're missing out on $50 a hectare. Now, it's important to note the first example where we're getting that June runoff, sorry. So we're going to get water flowing out of the soil profile. So it's going to be pushing out. Whereas in our second example, we are infiltration limited, which means we're going to get this surface flow. Now, the surface flow in itself is going to have a lot of problems. We're going to get a lot more erosion, which is very problematic. We're going to lose soil and all that. So let's combine these two things and consider, I guess, what's going to happen. So we've got a large infiltration rate and a large water holding capacity. So the infiltration rate keeps up with rainfall. So that in the first hour, we're going to get all 20 mils. Second hour, we're going to get the next 20 mils, so 40 mils total. And we're going to do that all the way until the storm has passed. That should say 100 mils. But effectively, yeah, we're 100 mils full and we didn't lose any water. So we captured all of it. So using that same example as before, say we've got a wheat crop growing and it's using 4 mils a day. These first two examples, they're going to run out of water in 12.5 days, but our other example, that's going to have 25 days before it needs a top up. And so if your farm can last essentially twice as long as your neighbors, that's a very, very useful thing to have